The Pew study finds between 2009 and 2014, 870,000 Mexicans came to this country. During the same time frame, more than 1 million Mexicans left the U.S. Joining us to discuss this phenomenon is Meade, director of University of San Diego's Trans-Border Institute. The director of Hispanic research for the Pew Research Center says the era of mass Mexican migration is over. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And I think it's right because of the macroeconomic conditions, demographics in Mexico, population that's having fewer kids, getting older, and also because of U.S. border enforcement and the general security situation along the border. I think all these things have contributed to changing the decision-making for Mexican families about where they live. And it's for many families, it's meant the decision to go back to Mexico. And for those who are coming to Mexico, it also suggests that they're coming from Mexico. It suggests that they're coming for a different set of reasons than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah, what are the main reasons why people are moving back to Mexico?
People are moving back to Mexico, according to the Pew poll, 61%, it was for family reunification. That gets kind of complicated, though, because if you look at why people reunite with their families, in some cases it's because family members have been deported and they want to stay together. In other cases, it's because it's gotten harder to go back and forth across the border. So people have lost their connections with their home communities or with their communities in the U.S., and they have to make a sort of more permanent decision about where they're going to live. For others, it's just simply a fear of using these coyotes and smugglers who are increasingly involved with organized crime, and people don't want to deal with gangsters, and people don't want to face a real risk to their life and come to the United States, so they're not coming.
How big a factor has the sort of floundering economic recovery here played in this whole thing?
I think it's played a huge role. I mean, it's very clear that for many people, access to a good job in the United States is much less certain than it was in the 1990s and the construction boom, for example. So it plays a role. It also plays a role in the sense that the Mexican economy has improved dramatically. Since 2009, GDP in Mexico has grown by about 25%. I don't want to paint an overly rosy picture there, but cities like Tijuana that used to be transit stops, places that people went to on their way to the United States, they're now cities of in-migration, net in-migration, meaning that people are going there because there are better economic opportunities in Tijuana, and they're not going just across the United States. So this is a real change.
How has the failure of the U.S. to reform its immigration system affected these migration patterns?
I think it's kind of interesting. In some sense, it has driven some people now to return to Mexico because they've given up hope in a more permanent solution. It's also played a sort of reverse role because we have done a lot with immigration enforcement. We've really clamped down on the border, and that means that it's harder to cross back and forth and that people have to really make a final decision about where they're going to live. But it also means that people who want to make an undocumented crossing, an unauthorized crossing, have to do so in the wilderness, in these really dangerous areas, and many people are just opting out of that.
Now, GOP presidential candidate Donald Trump has made a big issue of asking Mexico, if he's president, to pay for a border fence along the entire U.S.-Mexico border. How does that play with the reality of what we're seeing on the border right now?
Well, I think what you see is, and I'm so glad the Pew poll came out because it gives us kind of a reality check, a nice fact check, a pause. Because it says that things like the images of those kids last summer in the Border Patrol stations, or the odd Middle Easterner who's caught trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border, or the odd security scare on the border, that they're really far off trend. And the much broader trend is that the border is secure and that we're at a 40-year low in undocumented immigration to the United States. So the border is not in crisis. We are not overwhelmed with people. And that should give us a chance to have a real slow, careful, rational conversation about what our immigration policy should be, not a crisis-led reaction.
But what's the realistic possibility that we'll have that rational, calm conversation?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, we're in a moment that we've had before in American history where we've had a big migration pattern. Migration from Mexico to the United States from 1965 to 2007 is one of the biggest flows in world history. And here, 10 or 15 years later, as those folks seek full incorporation into American society, we're getting the reaction. And it's going to be a tough one, and it may last for a while.
Okay, Meade, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kenny.